And he said, there's so many things I don't know about yet. And then he said, but I'm so excited to find out. And then he paused, and the last thing he said was, I just hope I get the chance. And Martin was facing 100 years in prison for his part in a gang-related stabbing. So here was this kid literally coming of age, right? Discovering that there's this larger world out there, understanding for the first time he might have a place in it, getting excited to find that place, all while facing life in prison. Like, talk about never having a chance, right? Like, this kid is trapped, or he's like stuck between a childhood that he never got to have and an adulthood that he's most likely not going to get to have. So I go home thinking about Martin, and a few days later I learn about this bill that would give Martin and everyone in his situation a second chance, this bill called SB 260. And it was just about to enter the legislature. And all of a sudden, I wasn't writing a screenplay anymore, I was making a documentary. And there are a lot of stories that I could tell you about making the documentary. If anybody has any questions, I'll answer them. There's one thing that really came to mind that I wanted to share with you guys. After that first visit in Men's Central Jail, I noticed something about myself. I was really drawn to these kids. I wanted to know them. I wanted to explore, my connection with them and where that was coming from. And I think I figured out why that was. It was really thrilling to connect with someone like Martin or the kids in the documentary and see how far those connections went, how close I could get to them, knowing that eventually I would hit an insurmountable wall, because no matter how many similarities we had, they were capable of taking a life and I wasn't. Back to that kind of same mentality that I had. So it was endlessly fascinating for me to see how close I could be to them, how similar we could be, knowing that there is still this big barrier. Along the way of shooting the movie, obviously, I'm interviewing Juan, Jared, and Antonio. I'm getting to know them better. I'm learning about all the circumstances that they grew up with, the things that surround, the story of their crimes, the hopelessness of the type of poverty that they endured, the pain of having a broken family and a neglected community, addiction issues, total, complete lack of opportunities, the need to seek that love and acceptance from a gang. It all started to make total sense, but I still thought when push came to shove, it took a certain type of person to pull the trigger. That was kind of still in the back of my mind. And then, as I'm interviewing one of these kids, and I'm not gonna say which one specifically it is, but I'm interviewing one of the guys in the documentary, and he starts talking about this incident. We're getting into loss of innocence. We're trying to track down, what was that moment that turned you, that led you to where you are now. And he's talking about this incident, something that happened to him, and he won't go there. He won't get into it. And I've already heard stories from him that would have crushed me. Things that he saw, things that he did, that were unthinkable, unimaginable, and yet there's this other thing that he won't touch. And I, of course, am desperate to kind of learn what that was, and I'm asking him, and I'm pushing him pretty hard, and he's pushing back really hard. And eventually it must have loosened up inside of him, because halfway through class he pulled me aside and he told me to turn off the microphone. And he just let it out. And he told me this story about when he was 12 years old. He had the biggest crush on this girl at his school, and she, he was like couldn't get over this girl. And he went to school one day, and his older brother had started going out with her. His older brother had basically like kind of stolen her from him, and he was devastated. And he came home early. And he went straight to his room, and his mom saw him go to his room, and she noticed something was wrong, so she went up, she sat, next to him on his bed, put her arm around him and asked him what happened, and he told her the whole story about the girl, about his brother, about how sad he was, and she, started to console him. And then she asked him, who's the girl? And he said the girl's name, and his mom started laughing. And she said, "Oh, you like that bitch?" And then she left the room. And that was the moment. that was the moment. It was not being heard. It wasn't being emotionally taken care of in the way that he needed. And I remember thinking when I heard that story, my first reaction was, yeah, then what happened? Then what was the thing that happened? You know, how could that be more significant than the first time you did meth, right? Or the first time you saw someone get murdered? It couldn't be a big deal. And I realized the reason I was kind of delegitimizing that experience was because that had happened to me. You know, I've experienced feeling not listened to, not heard, not loved when I needed to be loved by a parent. So if I had experienced that, you know, and my life is great, how could that have mattered so much? And yet, in spite of all that, here's this guy who's you know, awaiting trial for having executed a rival gang member at point blank range, and he's telling me that this was his memory, that he took the road back through his loss of innocence and it led him to this. This was the thing, and you know, I couldn't argue with that. So of course it led me to, you know, the first revelation was, holy shit, I'm devaluing my own pain. And then the second thing was, you know, inevitable, that we're exactly the same. That had I grown up, you know, in his environment, that I had grown up under his circumstances, I might have done what he did. I could be capable of taking a life. And that's when all the walls fell for me. That's when the bridge of empathy had been fully crossed, and the tragedy of their lives and the tragedy of the things that they had done really sank in. The fact that, like, the result of trauma, hurt, and lack of love, some of these things that I had experienced in my own way, combined with other circumstances and their lives, could lead to the most tragic of circumstances. And at that point, I stopped being interested in the stories of people's crimes. You know, in the beginning, a few years ago, when I would meet somebody who had done 20 years in prison, the first thing I wanted to know was, what did you do? You know, not out of a place of judgment, just like a place of kind of morbid curiosity. And then I noticed that just started to go away. Because in the beginning, I was like a zoologist, kind of like curious to study this foreign species that could do something like that. But once I realized that I could do it also, like, there was nothing to learn about that. All I wanted to learn after that point was just who this person was now. So before we left the corner of the room, you know, this kid, he said one other thing to me. He said sometimes he sits in his cell at night and he tries to cry, but he can't cry. And, you know, since then I've heard that exact thing more times than I can ever count. And it's something that I relate to personally as well. So the question is, how do we help each other break that resistance, right? How do we help each other break down those walls? How do we help each other be able to cry? And I have no idea. And I told you guys I'm not an expert, so there you go. But I know one thing. I know what you can't do in that situation. You can't make somebody feel bad or lesser than for not crying. In the same way that you learn not to shame somebody for shedding tears, we can't shame somebody for the lack of tears. We have to accept the inability to feel, because it's as natural and as normal as feelings themselves. And we have to be supernaturally understanding and compassionate of sociopathic behavior, because we know that it's coming from a place of pain. And I realize that it must be especially hard to cry when you're sitting in your cell trying your hardest to do it, because you think if you don't, you're not normal, or you're a psychopath, or you're as evil as everybody says you are. So it's not about crying, it's not about feeling, it's not even about empathy. All that will come, right? It's about working on knowing ourselves, on defining a sense of self, you know, this awareness of our unique place in the world. Because what I learned from so many of these guys, you know, as a filmmaker and as a teacher, if you grow up defined only in a group, right, as a faceless, nameless member of a gang, or an insignificant statistic, or another case on a probation officer's caseload, if you grow up without the opportunity to define yourself against these groups, or without the love and support that allows you the courage to be your own person, that's a really bad situation. Like I think we all can attest to the fact that somebody without a sense of self, who's lacking self-worth, can be very dangerous. It's very dangerous. I think about specifically the kids, the gang members that I have met, and how do they shoot at each other indiscriminately, right? With seemingly so little remorse. And I realize it's really easy to shoot at your mirror image when you see nothing in the mirror. So we all have to work to become full, complete human beings. I think arts programming helps a lot. I think a lot of services help a lot. I think a class like the Inside Out Writers class that I visited at Men's Central Jail, we have to decide for ourselves, and we have to help others to decide what we like and what we don't like. And that could be just similar things, just crafting a point of view, right? Carving facets in the diamond that is each of our identities, one decision at a time. I prefer this microphone to this microphone because this tape isn't peeling off. It seems stupid, but it matters. Just having a point of view in life matters. So we have to decide what we like and what we don't like, what we want to do with our lives. Do you want to be an architect? Do you want to be an engineer? Why? And we have to encourage this exploration, because I know that even the most hardened, badass kid, he's excited to find out, if and only if he gets the chance. So thank you all for having me.